Guy de Maupassant, The Prisoners. A deathly hush lay over the forest, broken only by the faint rustle of snowflakes settling on the branches. The fine snow had been falling since morning, powdering the branches with an icy moss, draping the withered leaves in the thickets with light, silvery caps, spreading an endless, soft white carpet over the paths, and deepening the silence of that primeval ocean of trees. Near the forester's lodge, a young woman, her sleeves rolled up, was chopping wood on a large stone. She was tall, slender, and strong, a true child of the woods, a forester's daughter and a forester's wife. A voice came from the cottage. "Bertina, we're alone today. You'd better come inside. It's completely dark now, and no doubt there are both Prussians and wolves prowling about." The forester's wife was splitting a log, swinging the axe high above her head, which made her chest strain with every movement. "Come in, mother. I'm just finishing up. There's nothing to fear. It's not that dark yet," she replied. After carrying an armful of kindling and chopped wood into the kitchen and stacking it by the stove, she went out again, closed the shutters, thick, heavy shutters of solid oak, and returning inside, slid the massive door bolts into place. By the fire sat her mother, a wrinkled old woman who had grown timid with age and never let her spinning wheel out of her hands. "I don't like it when your father isn't home," she said. "Two women alone aren't much use." "Well, I could take down either a wolf or a Prussian," retorted the younger woman, nodding toward a large revolver hanging above the hearth. Her husband had joined the army at the start of the Prussian invasion, and the two women had stayed on with the father, old Forester Nicholas Pichon, nicknamed Stretch, who had flatly refused to leave his home and moved to the city. The nearest town, Red Hell, was an old fortress perched on a rock. Its inhabitants, staunch patriots, had decided to resist the invader, to barricade themselves within its walls, and, following an ancient tradition, to honorably withstand a siege. Twice before, under Henry IV and under Louis XIV, the people of Red Hell had covered themselves in glory through the heroic defense of their stronghold. And now, by God, they would do the same, or be burned alive within their own city walls. They had bought cannons and rifles, equipped a militia, formed companies and battalions, and drilled all day long on the square. Bakers, grocers, butchers, notaries, lawyers, carpenters, booksellers, and even apothecaries, all, in turn and at set hours, performed drills under the command of Monsieur Levine, a former dragoon sergeant major, now the owner of a haberdashery. Having retired from the army, he had married the daughter of old Monsieur Ravadain and inherited his business. He had been given the rank of commandant of the fortress, and, after all the young men had left for the front, he had raised a militia from the remaining townspeople. The militiamen diligently prepared for the defense. The fat men ran through the streets to work off their fat and catch their breath. The frail carried heavy loads to strengthen their muscles. The town waited for the Prussians, but they did not appear. Yet they were close. Twice their scouts had ventured through the forest to the lodge of Nicholas Pichon, called Stretch. The old forester, as swift as a fox, would run to town to warn the citizens. They would aim their cannons, but the enemy never came. Stretch's dwelling served as the town's outpost in the Avelan forest. Twice a week, Pichon went to the city for provisions and brought the inhabitants news from the surrounding area. That day, he had set off to inform the commandant that the day before yesterday, towards evening, a small detachment of German infantry had stopped at his place very briefly. The non-commissioned officer in command spoke French. Fearing the wolves, which were growing fiercer every day, the old man, Whenever he left, took his 2 guard dogs with him, enormous beasts with lion-like jaws, and ordered the women to bolt the door fast at nightfall. The daughter feared nothing, but the mother was perpetually trembling with fear and repeated the same refrain. "This will end badly. You'll see. It will end badly." That evening, she was more anxious than usual. "And when will your father be back?" she asked. "Well, certainly not before 11. When he dines with the commandant, he always comes back late." The daughter had just hung the soup pot over the fire when she suddenly froze, listening to an indistinct noise coming down the chimney. "Do you hear that? People walking in the forest. 8 of them, at least," she whispered. The old woman stopped her spinning wheel in fright. "Oh, good Lord, and your father isn't here." No sooner had she spoken than the door shuddered from powerful blows. The women did not answer. "Open oop!" came a loud, guttural cry. A moment later, the same voice repeated, "Open oop, or I will break ze door." Bertina tucked the revolver from above the stove into her skirt waistband, pressed her ear to the door, and asked, "Who is there?" "My detachment. We were here before," came the reply. "What do you want?" The forester's wife persisted. "We are lost in Z forest with Z detachment all day. Open oop, or I break Z door." There was no choice. The forester's wife slid back the heavy bolts and, opening the door crack, made out 6 men in the snowy twilight, the same Prussian soldiers. In a firm voice, she asked, "What do you want at this hour?" The non-commissioned officer repeated, "We are lost, completely lost, but I recognize your house. My men have not eaten all day, and my detachment neither. But tonight, it's just my mother and I alone in the house," declared Bertina. The soldier gave the impression of a decent man. "This is nothing," he answered. "I will do nothing bad, but you must give us something to eat. We are falling from hunger and fatigue." The forester's wife stepped aside. "Come in," she said. The detachment filed into the kitchen. The soldiers were covered in snow. Their helmets seemed coated in whipped cream and resembled meringues. They all looked utterly exhausted. The forester's wife pointed to the benches on either side of the large table. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make you some soup now. I can see you can scarcely drag your feet." With these words, she locked the door again with its bolts. Adding more water to the pot, she put in some butter, threw in more potatoes, then took down a piece of bacon hanging from a hook above the hearth, cut half of it off, and dropped it into the boiling water. The 6 soldiers followed her every movement with hungry eyes. Having stacked their rifles and helmets in a corner, they now waited for the meal, as docile as schoolboys at their desks. The old woman took up her spinning wheel again, casting bewildered glances at the invaders every minute. The only sounds in the kitchen were the soft whir of the spindle, the crackle of the fire, and the bubbling of the water coming to a boil. Suddenly, everyone started at a strange sound outside the door, like the hoarse, noisy panting of a beast. The non-commissioned officer dashed towards the corner where the weapon stood, but the forester's wife, smiling, stopped him with a gesture. "Those are wolves," she explained. "They're like you, hungry and also prowling the forest." The distrustful German wanted to see for himself, and no sooner had he opened the door than he saw 2 large gray beasts fleeing into the distance with a long, swift trot. "I would not like to meet them," muttered the Prussian, returning to his place to wait for the soup. They ate greedily, opening their mouths wider than usual. Their round eyes seemed to open with their jaws, and a gurgling sound came from their throats, like water in a drain pipe. The women silently watched the rapid movements of the thick, red beards. It seemed as if the potato chunks were disappearing into those moving thickets. The soldiers grew thirsty, and the forester's wife went down to the cellar for cider. She stayed down there for quite some time. It was a vaulted basement. Rumor had it that during the Revolution it had served as a prison and a hiding place. One had to descend through a trapdoor in the corner of the kitchen via a narrow, winding staircase. When Bertina returned, she had the look of someone who is plotting something. She was quietly laughing to herself. Having eaten their fill, all 6 soldiers began to doze off without leaving their seats. From time to time, a forehead would hit the table with a dull thud, and the soldier, jolted suddenly awake, would straighten up. "You should lie down by the fire. There's plenty of room for all 6 of you. My mother and I will go to my room," Bertina said to the non-commissioned officer. The women went upstairs. The sound of them locking the door and walking about the room could be heard. Then everything fell silent. The Prussians stretched out on the floor, their feet towards the fire, their rolled-up greatcoats under their heads. Soon all 6 were snoring in different keys, some tenors, some basses, but all equally loud and drawn out. They had been sleeping for a good while when a shot rang out, so loud it seemed to have been fired right at the house. The soldiers jumped to their feet, but then 2 more shots thundered, followed by another 3. The door upstairs flew open, and the forester's wife appeared on the threshold, terrified, holding a candle, barefoot, in nothing but her shift and a skirt. "It's the French. There are 200 of them, at least," she stammered. "If they find you here, they will burn the house down. Quickly, down to the cellar and be quiet, or we are all lost." "Gut, gut," the non-commissioned officer whispered in confusion. "Where must we go down?" The forester's wife lifted the narrow, square trapdoor, and the 6 soldiers, one after another, backing onto the steps to feel their way, began to descend the winding staircase and disappeared into the vault. No sooner had the copper helmet of the last soldier vanished from sight than Bertina slammed shut the heavy oak cellar lid. Thick as a wall, strong as steel, mounted on sturdy hinges and secured by a prison lock. She turned the key twice and burst into a soundless, triumphant laugh. A wild, almost frenzied desire to dance over the heads of her prisoners seized her. The Prussians sat trapped, locked in that stone box, that stout underground vault, where air entered only through a single vent covered by an iron grill. Bertina quickly stoked the fire, hung the pot over it again, and set about finishing the soup. "Father will be very tired tonight," she muttered. Then she sat down to wait. Only the clear ticking of the wall clock's pendulum broke the silence with its steady rhythm. From time to time, the woman cast an impatient glance at the clock face, as if saying, "How slowly they crawl." Soon, she fancied a muffled stir under her feet. A quiet, indistinct whispering seeped through the stone vaulting. The Prussians were beginning to suspect they had been tricked, and presently the non-commissioned officer climbed the steps and began pounding his fist against the trapdoor lid. "Open oop," he bellowed again. She approached closer and, mimicking his accent, asked, "Vad is it you wish?" "Open oop." "I not open oop." The German flew into a rage. "Open oop, or I break ze door." She laughed. "Break it, my dear man, try." He set about beating the oak lid with his rifle, but such a barrier could have withstood a battering ram. The forester's wife heard the non-commissioned officer descend. Then, one after another, the other soldiers came up, tested their strength, and tried the fastening sturdiness. But, convinced of the futility of their efforts, they gathered again in the cellar and began whispering among themselves. At first, Bertina tried to make out what they were saying, Then she opened the main door and listened intently into the night's darkness. A distant bark reached her. She whistled like a hunter, and almost immediately two enormous dogs emerged from the darkness and joyfully rushed towards her. Grabbing them by their collars to prevent them from running off, she shouted with all her might, "Halloo, father!" A reply came from far away. "Halloo, Bertina!" Waiting a moment, she shouted again, "Halloo, father!" A closer voice responded, "Halloo, Bertina! Don't go near the air vent. There are Prussians in the cellar," shouted the forester's wife. Suddenly, to the left, a huge shadow loomed and stood still between two trees. "Prussians in the cellar? How did they get there?" the old man asked anxiously. His daughter laughed. "It's the ones from the day before yesterday. They got lost in the forest, so I gave them a cool reception in the cellar." And she told him everything, how she had frightened them with revolver shots and locked them in a vault. The old man asked discontentedly, "And what, in your opinion, am I to do with them now?" "Go fetch Monsieur Levine and his detachment. He will take them prisoner. Now there will be joy." At that, old Pichon smirked. "Joy indeed, no doubt about it. The soup is ready. Eat quickly and be on your way," said the daughter. The old man sat down at the table and set to eating, having first placed 2 bowls of food on the floor for the dogs. Hearing the voices, the Germans fell silent. Half an hour later, Stretch departed again, and Bertina, resting her head in her hands, remained waiting. The prisoners stirred once more. Now they shouted, called for help, and beat incessantly against the unyielding cellar lid. Then they started firing through the air vent, hoping some German detachment nearby might hear them. The forester's wife sat motionless, but the noise disturbed and angered her. A furious wrath rose within her. She felt ready to kill all those scoundrels just to silence them. Her anxiety grew with each passing minute. She glanced at the clock constantly, counting the minutes. Her father had left an hour and a half ago. He must be in the city by now. She pictured it clearly. She saw him telling Levine what had happened, saw Levine grow pale with excitement, ring for the maid, and order his uniform and weapons brought to him. She seemed to hear the drum beating in the streets. Frightened townsfolk leaned out of their windows. Half-dressed militiamen rushed out of houses and, fastening their sword belts, ran at a quick pace towards the commandant's house. Then the detachment, led by Stretch, set off into the night's darkness, into the snowy wilderness, into the very thick of the forest. She glanced at the clock. They won't be here for at least an hour. Her nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Each minute felt like an eternity. How unbearably it all dragged on. Finally, the time came when, by her calculations, the French detachment should have reached the lodge. The forester's wife opened the door and listened. Spotting a cautiously approaching shadow, she cried out in fright. But it was her father. "They sent me ahead to see if anything was the matter," he said. "Everything's unchanged." The forester pierced the night's darkness with a long, sharp whistle. And soon, something dark became visible under the trees, slowly approaching. It was a vanguard of about 10 men. "Keep away from the air vent," Stretch repeated incessantly. And those in front pointed out the dangerous opening to those following behind. Finally, the main force appeared, all 200 men, each with 200 rounds of ammunition. An excited Levine positioned his men so that the house was completely surrounded. The only clear space was in front of the small black hole near the ground that served as the cellar's air vent. After giving his orders, Levine entered the forester's dwelling and began questioning them about the enemy's numbers and disposition. The enemies, meanwhile, had fallen so silent that one might think they had vanished into the earth. Levine stamped his foot on the trapdoor lid and shouted, "Her offizier!" The German did not respond. "Her offizier," the commandant repeated. Again, there was no reply. For 20 minutes, he tried to persuade the silent officer to surrender with his weapons, promising to spare his life and the lives of his soldiers and to accord them military honors. But he detected not the slightest sign of either agreement or resistance. The situation was becoming delicate. The militiamen tramped about in the snow, slapping their shoulders vigorously, like coachmen trying to warm up, glancing at the sinister air vent, while a childish, mischievous desire to run past it grew in them. Finally, a soldier named Potvin, an agile fellow, decided to risk it. He dashed past the air vent, swift as a deer. The attempt was successful. The prisoners seemed dead. "There's no one in there," a voice called out. Another soldier hurtled past the fateful opening. It became a game. One after another, soldiers would sprint headlong from one group to another, just like children playing tag, their feet moving so fast that clumps of snow flew up from under them. To warm up, the militiamen lit fires of brushwood, and the running figures were illuminated by the flickering flames. "Maupassant, now it's your turn," someone shouted. Maupassant was a fat baker, whose belly was a constant source of jokes. The fat man hesitated. Jeers rained down on him. So, plucking up his courage, he set off at a short, steady trot, his considerable belly shaking with emotion. The whole detachment roared with laughter. "Bravo! Bravo, Maupassant!" his comrades shouted, encouraging him. He had already covered 2/3 of the distance when a long, red tongue of flame shot out from the air vent. A shot rang out, and the portly baker fell face down into the snow with a wild cry. No one rushed to help him. He crawled a few paces on all fours, groaning, and after passing the danger zone, lost consciousness. The bullet was lodged in the upper part of his thigh. After the first minutes of confusion and fear, laughter erupted again. Commandant Levine appeared on the threshold of the lodge. He had already formulated a plan of attack. "Tinsmith Planshet and his assistants," he called out loudly. 3 men came forward. "Take the drain pipes off the house." A quarter of an hour later, 20 meters of gutter lay before the commandant. Having ordered a neat hole to be drilled near the edge of the trapdoor, he announced cheerfully when the fire pump hose was connected to it, "Now we'll treat the German gentleman to a drink of water." A thunderous, jubilant hurrah, joyful shouts, and bursts of laughter answered him. The commandant divided the detachment into work parties to relieve each other every 5 minutes, and commanded, "Begin." The iron pump handle began to work. A gurgling sound ran through the pipes, and water rushed down the steps into the cellar, like the plashing of a fountain or a garden pond. An hour passed, then another, then a third. The commandant paced the kitchen in a fury. From time to time, he pressed his ear to the floor, trying to guess the enemy's actions and wondering when they would surrender. At last, the enemy showed signs of life. The sounds of barrels being moved, men talking, and splashing in the water could be heard. And then, around 8 in the morning, a voice came from the air vent. "I wish to speak to the French officer." Trying not to show himself, Levine asked, "Do you surrender?" "I surrender." "Then throw all your weapons into the yard." And everyone saw a rifle fly out of the opening and fall into the snow, then another, then a third, all 6 rifles. The same voice shouted, "There are no more. Be quick. I am drowning." The commandant ordered, "Stop." The pump handle fell still. When the kitchen was filled with militiamen standing ready with their rifles, the commandant lifted the oak trapdoor lid. First, 4 wet heads appeared, 4 fair-haired heads with long, colorless hair, and finally, from the cellar, one after another, emerged 6 trembling, soaked to the bone, bewildered Germans. They were immediately seized and bound. Then, fearing surprises, the detachment immediately set off on the return journey, splitting into 2 groups. One escorted the prisoners. The other carried on a pole made of branches a mattress on which the wounded Maloysen lay. They returned to Red Hell in triumph. Levine was awarded a medal for the capture of a Prussian vanguard, and the portly baker received a medal for a wound received in action with the enemy.